Did I buy Jim enough time with that? No?
Nope.
Oh, I heard a bing.
Messy.
Okay, so no public comment, called to order, and so we will go to approval of the minutes of the meeting of June 8th.
Move we approve.
Okay, I will second that. Any discussion, anything you want to say? It left out my passionate appeal for a grandiose picture of what great projects we're going to do, but that was
But I did
probably
see
wise.
I did see it in the survey I got in the mail.
Okay. So, all right. So are you in favor of these minutes, Tammy?
I am.
And so am I. So we will call those approved. And I'm sure Jim will slip in on us real quick, but why don't we warm up the bond initiative item B1? President Erica, or
I am going to turn it
VP
right over to
Candace?
Candace Jones.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So we are here to give you an update on our tracking polls that we promised at our June board meeting. I've got Dr. Timothy McClarney here and Mr. Charles Heath, who are going to lead us through the process that we went through in terms of re-benchmarking against the data that we shared out at our February board meeting. I'm also going to allow them to just introduce themselves and a little bit. I have my other bond folks here. These are all faces that you should be super familiar with as we have worked on this project for about a year. But why don't I maybe Charles, do you want to start and then kick over to Dr. McClarney? Or
sure thing.
Versa, whichever.
No, that works fine. I'll start and kick it to Tim. So I'm Charles Heath. I'm a partner with TBWBH Props and Measures. We're the strategy and communications consultants for the bond effort, and excited to deliver some updated opinion research results to you tonight. And Tim, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Tim McClarney. I am the president of True North Research. We're a firm that specializes in the survey research that goes behind assessing whether bond measures or other type of revenue measures are feasible, and if so, how might you go about structuring that measure in a way that it's consistent with the type of measure that your community is interested in supporting. Are we doing more introductions to the team, or should I launch into the presentation at this point?
I would say go for it.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do then, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen, and everybody should have that. Okay, and I'm going to stretch you back out here so I can see everybody again on this other monitor. So this PowerPoint is really hot off the press. I had the top line results about 2 days ago, or actually yesterday. We prepared this PowerPoint presentation. There is a more detailed full report forthcoming, but we're fresh out of the field on this, and we're able to take sort of a high level read on what these results look like and how they compare to your baseline poll. And so we put together a PowerPoint that does that for you. I welcome questions from members of the committee as I go, or at the end, whichever is your preference. Okay, so now I need to go up here. Okay, so before we get into the results, it's helpful to take just a moment to review the purpose of the study. This one's a little different than the baseline poll that we conducted back in January. In that measure, we were really trying to understand. It was our first read at how your voters might approach a potential bond measure. We tested a series of different tax rates to get an understanding of where their comfort zone was with respect to price. We found at the time when we did that baseline poll that it looked promising. That was back in January. It's only been 6 months, but it's been kind of a wild ride these past 6 months. We've had some more challenging events pop up, although inflation was already with us. We've had confirmation it's at 40-year highs, and it seems to be kind of stubborn. We have high gas prices due to this ongoing war in Ukraine. We also have, sort of a concerns about where the economy is headed and possibly into recession. That is, you're hearing that drumbeat more and more in recent weeks. And so one of the main goals of the tracking survey is really to go back out and stick our finger in the wind and say, okay, now that we're 6 months out from the the baseline poll, we're closer to that point when the board is going to choose to place a measure on the ballot. How does it look, right? What level of support are we seeing in the current environment? It's also an opportunity for us to confirm the priorities that voters expressed in the baseline poll as still being their priorities with respect to how bond proceeds would be spent, right? There's probably no shortage of things you could spend the bond funds on. You have your own understanding of what your facility needs are. Voters have their understanding about what their priorities are. And, the goal here is to understand kind of how those intersect and overlap. Although we felt based on the baseline poll that tax rate of $20 per 100,000 assessed valuation was the right kind of sweet spot for your voters in terms of that sort of risk reward proposition. We wanted to make sure that was in fact still the case. And then it's also an opportunity for us to understand the impacts of messaging on voters' opinions about your proposal. So these are the sort of the overarching goals. In terms of the methodology we use, this methodology is essentially the same as that we used for the baseline poll back in January. And we wound up speaking with 823 voters in the district selected using stratified random sampling that are representative of your likely November 2022 universe. When you look at our sample in relation to that larger universe, we have matched in terms of age, gender, partisanship, household profile, as well as distribution around the district. And so it's just a microcosm of that larger universe, which is one of the things that allows us to be able to extrapolate these results with a high degree of reliability. We use a mixed method for recruiting. That means we reached out by email, text, and telephone. Data collection was conducted either online or by telephone, whichever was the person's preference. 3 different languages, like we did in the baseline poll. And now, because this is a random sample of 823 voters and not a census of all of your likely November voters, has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, it's a little over 3%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results we'll share with you tonight are within 3.4% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely voters. Okay, on to the results. So at the outset of the survey, we open up with what we call our importance of issues question. And for each of the issues you see here on the slide, we simply asked voters to tell us, how important is this to you? Is it extremely important, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important? These are asked in a random order, but they are sorted from high to low here based on that combined percentage of folks who said it was either extremely or very important, which is also represented in that box off to the right of the slide. We asked this question both because it's a nice warm-up question, just kind of gets voters into the groove of taking the survey, but it is also an opportunity for us to understand how items that would be related to your bond, in particular the topic of ensuring local access to affordable, high-quality education and career training, as well as repairing aging classrooms and facilities at local community colleges, how those issues stack up against other issues that also compete for tax dollars, and in particular, how those issues stack up against the issue of preventing local tax increases. Kind of a rough rule of thumb, but it makes a lot of sense. If what you're proposing to accomplish with your revenue measure rates considerably higher than the issue of preventing local tax increases, you tend to have good prospects for a successful measure. If preventing local tax increases ranks up above what you're trying to accomplish, that usually means you got a pretty steep hill to climb. So what we see here in your community, the number one issue was addressing homelessness at 84%, either extremely or very important, followed by creating jobs and improving the local economy. And then third on the list there, ensuring local access to affordable, high quality college education and career training. That checked in at 78%, which is basically the same as where it was in the baseline poll 6 months ago. As you move down the list and you compare that to preventing local tax increases at 56%, you've got about a 22-point gap there. That's good. That is also similar to the gap that we had back in January. And then finally, if you look right above preventing local tax increases, you see this item of repairing aging classrooms and facilities at local community colleges. Tests quite a bit lower than that issue of ensuring local access to affordable, high quality college education and career training. I point that out not because it's unusual. It's actually a very common pattern. And it's just a reminder to us that although bonds are about facilities, right? It's about making improvements and repairs to your buildings and facilities. At the end of the day, what voters really care about isn't the facilities themselves, but what those facilities enable or what happens inside those facilities. And so as you move forward with any type of bond measure, you're always wanting to be connecting the dots between what it is you're building and fixing and why it matters to your mission of educating students. And these patterns, once again, are very similar to what we saw in that baseline poll. So from here, we go right to what we call the initial ballot test. And the idea is, before we get any deeper into this interview and start talking in detail about possible tax rate and implications of this measure from a price tag perspective, we talk in more detail about the projects that would be funded or present arguments pro and con. We want to present to respondents a mock-up of what we think that 75-word ballot statement will look like and get their reaction. It is a really good gauge of where your voters are at today with respect to this proposal. And you can see here that we're testing a $565 million bond with a tax rate of 2 cents per $100 of assessed value. That's the same thing as a $20 per 100,000 of assessed value tax rate. Raise about $32 million annually while bonds are outstanding. And in the limited space that we have in the 75 words, we've done our best in the bullets above to hit on the things that we found from the baseline poll really resonated with your voters and try and give ourselves the strongest 75-word statement that we can have. And so that's the language that we tested. And here are the results. I'm showing on the left the tracking poll results. On the right are the results from the baseline study back in January. And you have to stare hard to see differences, but there are slight differences. But for the most part, what we're seeing is that voter sentiments about your proposed bond in the current environment are strikingly similar to what they were back in January. That's actually a good thing. Again, I think over the last 6 months, the news on the economic front and some of the political fronts has become more challenging, right? And we have seen some sort of, we have seen voter confidence in where the economy is going drop considerably. And so against those sort of headwinds, so to speak, we've been able to hold that line and stay at 65% support. That is 10 points above the 55% threshold that you need to be successful for a Prop 39 bond. And so that's a good thing.
Tim, there's a quick question from Trustee
Yeah,
Osterling.
this is a quick question. Tim, is the language on the left and the right exactly the same in January and July that you tested?
Very close. So
Okay.
Two things. If you go back to that baseline poll, we tested two different bond amounts. We tested a 565 and then we had one that I think was like 690 something. And the comparisons I'm showing you are the 565 amount so that we are apples to apples on the bond amount. And the language was pretty close. I think we made a couple of minor tweaks.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. So after the initial ballot test, we want to focus in for a minute on the tax implications of the bond. We want to make it very clear, in case they didn't catch that in the 75 words, that bonds mean taxes. And we want to also convey to them what the tax implications would be. We did this a little differently in the tracking poll. In the baseline poll, we tested several different tax thresholds, and then we tested several different annual amounts that the median homeowner would pay in your community. Given that this was a tracking poll, we knew we were zeroing in on that $20 per 100,000 assessed valuation rate. What we did is we combined that information into one sentence or a couple sentences. It says, if the bond is approved by voters, it will increase property values by $20 per 100,000 of assessed valuation. This means for the typical homeowner, it will cost about $102 per year. So you're giving them both pieces. What we tend to find is the tax rate, no matter what it is, you tend to get a somewhat lower response if you just focus on the rate, in part because not everybody knows how to do the math and figure out what this means. When you simplify it and give them the total amount, annual amount, you tend to get a somewhat better reaction because, okay, I may not know what $20 per 100,000 assessed value adds up to, but if you tell me it's $102 per year for the median homeowner, okay, you've anchored me. I know what the price tag is, and now I can respond. And so we see at that combination of information, we have 58% support for the proposal. This is lower, obviously, than the 65% we started out with. That's also typical. The more you kind of put the blinders on a voter and you focus their attention on the price tag, typically support starts to drop. The more you focus their attention on what the projects are going to be funded, as well as the benefits of a bond, support tends to go up. So, but I think at 58%, we're sitting at the point you want to be, right? You're I think you've hit that spot where you've maximized the reward. It's the right risk reward balance, right? You're not at the $25 rate, which would be the Prop 39 max, but you're not picking up that extra level of risk. I feel good about that 58% right there. Okay, so after the tax threshold question, we move on to the projects and improvements section. Here is where we're starting to educate the respondent more about what this measure will accomplish, more so than we could in the 75-word ballot statement. And the other thing it allows us to do is to understand, of all the ways you could spend the money, how do voters feel about each of those items, which are the projects sort of rise to the top of the list, and which are the ones that sort of fall to the bottom. So when you look at the projects, all but the bottom two there have 80+% of voters say that they would favor spending some of the money on that item. And if you look at kind of the top 5 or 6 bars, what you see there is a combination of essentially repairing and modernizing your older facilities. So it's roofs, plumbing, electrical, bringing your older buildings up to current health codes, building safety codes, ADA access, that kind of stuff. It seems a little odd, but that kind of basic repairs to your facilities would be at the top of the list. But that's a pattern we see again and again and again. I mean, I've done hundreds of these, and I can't really think of a bond measure where basic repairs to your facilities doesn't wind up near the top of the list here. But it's also combined with anything related to sort of career training and career tech, STEM, and keeping your computer systems and technology up to date. So that combination of things is actually a pattern we're seeing a lot in the last 2 cycles that goes well together, right? It's part about modernizing our older facilities and taking care of them, but it's also focusing on, the technology improvements, the equipment improvements, and being able to science labs, et cetera, that support STEM and career tech. From here, after the projects and improvements, we go on to what we call the argument section of the poll. Here is where we start to simulate the type of discussion and debate that we expect will happen in your community should you as a board choose to place a measure on the ballot. These things don't happen in a vacuum. Once you decide to place it on the ballot, you're going to have advocates that will come out and talk to their neighbors and friends and explain to them why this is needed and why they should vote yes. You might also get some opposition. Folks step up and try and convince their neighbors and friends that this is a bad idea and we shouldn't be doing this. So by simulating that discussion and debate in the space of the poll, we get a good idea of not only where are your voters today, which was that initial ballot test, but where do they land once they've been exposed to arguments pro and con. Shown here are the positive arguments we tested. And one of the clear patterns you kind of see at the top there, and is one of the reasons why the ballot language is worded the way it is the theme of affordable access to high quality college education and career training, right? So the number one there, that Pasadena City Colleges ensures that lower and middle income students who can't afford the high price of a university still have opportunity to succeed in college and careers. Second one there talks about the high cost of the California state and UC systems, and that many students are starting at community colleges, and this measure ensures that they'll continue to have access to an affordable high quality education. Those 2 themes resonate the strongest in terms of messages, but there are others that also play well. Several of them in here focus on city colleges being a community resource, right? Both in terms of, every year you're educating thousands of local high school students, that you're educating the nurses and the healthcare professionals that serve the medical needs of the community, the police and firefighters and first responders who keep you safe, as well as the workers who fuel your economy. So those themes tend to resonate the best, although again, you have a lot of pretty strong positive arguments here. So after that positive argument section, you think about it, voters have heard more about this proposal than they did initially. We talked a bit about the tax implications. That tends to be a little bit of a wet blanket on support for the proposal. But then we had a chance to come back, talk about the various projects that would be funded, convey positive arguments. And so we circle back with what we call the interim ballot test, where we present that same 75-word ballot statement and figure out where they're at now. And what you see here on the left there is that after the positives there, we land at 69% at the interim ballot test. So we've jumped up about 4 points. That is about 3 points higher than the place we were back in January of this year at the same point in the poll. So that's encouraging. And at 69% support, we are 14 points above that 55% threshold that you need to be successful on election day. And then we go to the negatives. And the idea behind the negatives is that we are going to pepper respondents with the types of opposition arguments we might expect you could encounter during the election cycle, so that we expose them to that side of the bait, and we also get an understanding of how they react to the information that is here. The number one negative here is pretty much the number one negative that we've seen in most of the districts we've been working with, and that's just the idea that this is a bad time to be thinking about a tax increase, right? We still have people are recovering from the pandemic. We've got inflation, we've got high gas prices, people are struggling. This is a bad time to be doing this. Sure, we'll hear some of that during the election cycle. We reference your 2002 bond and talk about how you raised $150 million. Other schools have passed similar bonds in recent years that are going to take 30 years to pay off. So we're trying to compile those together and basically present the case that you can't afford another bond, or the voters can't. And then third one there is just that, your area is already an expensive place to live. And this is especially for young families, seniors, and others. And this measure is going to make it even less affordable. So you can see we didn't pull any punches with these negatives. The whole point was to figure out how can we maximize the erosion by hitting on all these negatives that we think you might encounter. Ultimately, what happens afterwards is what we're most interested in, and that's shown here. So after the negatives, we land in the tracking poll at 60%. So the negatives collectively as a bundle packed a punch, right? They knocked us down about 9 points, but we're still landing 5 points above that 55% threshold that we need to be successful. The negatives this time were a little more impactful than they were last time. And so at the final ballot test and the baseline poll, we were at 64%. But again, both of these are numbers that, considering they come right after a series of negative arguments, anytime you're landing 5+% above that 55% threshold, that's a good sign. Okay, so what does all this mean? I'm going to focus more on sort of the comparison between where we were in January and where we are now as far as conclusions. I think one of the most encouraging signs here is, despite the economic and political environment souring a bit over the last 6 months in several ways, we found that support in the current environment for your bond at 65%, and that is the same as it was back in January. So we didn't see erosion in support over the last 6 months due to these various storm clouds that have blown in during this period of time. We also saw that what voters prioritize in terms of their use of bond funds has remained consistent. That's the modernizing and repairing your older facilities, keeping your technology up to date, and then improvements that are related to career training, career tech, and STEM. In terms of price tag, I think you're at a good spot. That $20 per 100,000 assessed valuation translates to about $100 a year for the median homeowner. I think that's where you'd want to land. I think the risk of going up versus the reward for the extra, say, $5 that you could possibly put on the table probably isn't worth it. And I think that's a good spot to land. And then finally, it was encouraging that, we saw that the positive arguments resonated with your voters. Even though we started at 65%, we were able to get support upwards of 69% in the survey by focusing on the things like affordable access to high quality education, career training, and the ability to start your college education affordably and then transfer to UC and Cal State systems down the line. These messages, I think, are really important to keep conveying into the future, especially since we did see that the opposition arguments, should you encounter those, get some traction. We want to be able to blunt those with lots of reasons for why people should be voting yes during that process. So with that, let me end my monologue, and I welcome questions from the committee, if there are any.
Tammy or Jim, or I see we have our student trustee has joined us as well.
I have no further questions, and Tim, that presentation was very thorough, and really appreciate the side-by-side comparisons between January and now. And I'm pleased to see that the polling is much the same despite all the economic shocks that have happened in the interim.
Yeah, thank you.
I have no questions. Like Jim said, thorough and well done. And I can't wait to get this on the ballot so we can start making PCC better.
Great.
I'll say that I think it was exceptionally well done. I too appreciate the comparisons, and I'm really obviously happy to see the way most of the results came out. I appreciate the way that you made an effort to identify satellite campuses. I will acknowledge the fact that despite what I thought and believed in my passion, it's clear that the satellite campuses gravitated more towards the bottom in comparison to some of the other ways it was presented. And the only small thing I might say in my defense is that I think, well, number one, obviously I represent the district probably the furthest from the main Colorado campus. It might be a little bit of a tie with La Cañada, but they got a freeway that shoots you right there, and we don't. And my only thought would be that when you use the term San Gabriel Valley, I would think that most voters would not think of, I'm thinking like Covina and Pomona is the San Gabriel Valley, right? So why do we need a campus?
Pomona's in the Pomona Valley.
Okay, sorry. Covina, San Dimas, maybe. Anyway, my point is that when we use the term San Gabriel Valley, it's a pretty big space that includes the East Valley as well as the West Valley, and doesn't quite say what I was trying to say, that makes accessibility better, which is obviously accessibility was the top, better because it's more local to our voters. But I do think that I appreciated the way you included it, and it speaks for itself. And I wish it just wasn't quite as broad as San Gabriel Valley. I think we would have had a little truer test on that topic.
So John, here's what we can do. We can put that language in your seat only on the ballot, for the voters in your seat only. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know that San Gabriel Valley will sell any better in Rosemead than it did in Pasadena or, San Marino.
It's always tough. Satellite campuses are always tough because, normally your main campus is serving a pretty large core of your voters. And if they feel well served by that, the notion of a satellite campus, wherever it is, just becomes a little less attractive. However, what I found really interesting is, we do tables by different breakouts. And the one I wanted to look at geographically was, what's the project ranking by trustee area, right? With the idea that some of the outlying trustee areas, maybe we're going to see a different answer with respect to the satellite campuses. And so I can pop this up here if you want.
Yeah, let's take a look.
So does everybody have that? It's a table.
I don't see it.
Okay, I've got to stop share and reshare because it's linked to my PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Hold on a
I
second.
think that's what you have to do. Yeah.
Let me do that, and let me come back to.
Yeah.
Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let me do that, and let me come back to. Let this. Everybody have a table now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So what this is a table that shows all the projects we tested on the left in the overall ranking. And then it's the percentage of people who said that they favored spending some of the money on that project, either strongly or somewhat. So we combine the favorability. And then just to make reading the table easier, what I did is I went down and I highlighted in green the top 3 projects in terms of the overall percentage. And there's a couple of cases where you have ties, and so some have 4, there's one has 5, right? But you're sort of highlighting the top projects. And then the one project that tests at the bottom of the list in every single category, I highlighted in orange. And so you can see that in every single trustee area, the lowest rated item was the satellite campus. And J1 and J2 were 2 different ways of talking about satellite campuses. J1 was about improving classrooms and facilities at existing satellite campuses, right? J2 was creating new satellite campuses so students could have equal access to facilities, technology, and education. So I only want to share this because, sometimes you see a result in the aggregate where a project tests at the bottom, but then when you dig behind it, what you realize is actually it's pretty polarized. You have one group who loves this thing and one group that doesn't. And these numbers aren't bad, right? They're 60-something%. They're favorable. It's just when you stack them up against the other things that the bond could fund, they just don't rise to the same height.
I really appreciate you doing that. And obviously, I think you've done this as scientifically as can possibly be done. And it speaks for itself. So,
Okay.
It kind of makes me power off my earlier requests that I think we're underselling ourselves, though I still believe we're underselling ourselves. But if underselling ourselves helps us to sell ourselves, then maybe we're not underselling ourselves.
I like it. Less is more.
Yes. So yeah, I think, so you've kind of like taken some wind out of the sails here, and I'll have to acknowledge that because I can do it. I do have one statistical question I'm just interested in, and won't have anything to do with my desire for our satellite campus in Rosemead. But when you get 823 responses, when somebody doesn't answer a survey, did it take 1,200 surveys to get 823 responses?
I see. Yeah.
Or 823 responses and you got 726 replies. I was just curious.
823 is the sample size for completed interviews. So that's 823 completed interviews.
All right.
We have to go out after a lot more individuals than that because you're not going to get through to everybody, and some folks are gonna not want to take the survey or what have you. And so, but that's where that stratified random sampling comes into play, because what we do when we're building our sample, we break that universe of likely voters down by these demographics that we know are related to how they tend to vote on tax measures, the most important of which is household party type, partisanship, age, gender, and geography. And then we build clusters that represent multidimensional profiles, so that if I know 5% of your electorate are Democratic females who live with another Democrat and live in a certain part of the district and are between 50 and 64 years of age, we make sure that 5% of our clusters match that profile. Then we randomly select people into the appropriate clusters. And the reason why that matters is because in today's day and age, when you reach out, you're not going to get everybody, right? And I'm able to replace somebody with a certain profile with someone who shares their exact same profile. And these multidimensional profiles are so predictive of how people tend to vote that when you do that, even though you may have a response rate of 20% in a poll, you're still very predictive in terms of what the community overall is thinking.
I appreciate you getting that. Okay.
Great.
is there some direction the administration is looking for from the committee?
I think this evening our goal was just to kind of re-benchmark the data at the request of the board. We wanted to go back out and poll. We will be presenting this information at the July 13th meeting, as well as the draft language and the draft ballot measure, which to our point, I think in our last board meeting, we described the project list as being more expansive and inclusive than the 75-word ballot language. I think we have done a good job, at least at testing out what we think will be successful in November. And so we have those 75 words that we will reshare out. That's pretty consistent to what we shared in the last board meeting. But I think the project list, the actual resolution, which includes projects and still has an expression of a satellite campus possibility. At that point, then at any point when the Board of Trustees would like us to move in that direction or expand or contract, as with all of the other projects on that list, we have some flexibility there. And so I think there's no reason to make any adjustments there. I think we were really wanted to be very focused and intentional about the 75-word ballot language. So I don't know if you want to see that again, we can share that right now and share that out.
I'd appreciate seeing it again.
Okay.
Yeah, and Candace, if I understood correctly what you just said, the language is the same as the last board meeting.
I think there was a couple of little adjustments, Charles, that
Okay.
you sent through today.
Let's see what we
I
got.
have that here. Do you want me to pull that up, Candace?
Please, that would be great.
Yeah,
I'd
give me 1
also
second.
like to say it's significantly less than 75 words. I think 35 of the words are required by law. So
That's
we
true.
really only have about 40 words to write ourselves. I believe that was how many I
Yeah.
counted.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There are a number of different statutory requirements for the ballot language, in terms of the total bond amount, the tax rate, the annual proceeds raised, so on and so forth. So we do have a limited number of words to play with. So what I have on this page here, I have the language we're proposing, which is very similar to what we looked at your last meeting. I made a couple of minor tweaks just based on the findings from this survey, primarily to name some of these specific program areas that tended to resonate with your voters. So again, just trying to align the ballot language as closely as possible with what voters are telling us are their top priorities. And I shared some other examples of other recent bond measures for other community colleges in the area. And you'll see a lot of commonality between these ballot questions, even though they're over a span of 4 to 6 years and different communities, different parts of Southern California. But there's kind of a proven set of projects that tend to really resonate with voters. And as Tim said, it's that combination of basic repairs and improvements, kind of STEM related programming, and career preparation, instructional technology, some of those themes. So, and the recent polling suggests that, it's testing at 65% plus. We don't want to monkey with it too much. And given all the challenges we're facing out there with the economy and whatnot, the fact that we're treading water, if not seeing some modest increases in support, suggests that I think our message and framing here is headed in the right direction.
So let me ask you, Charles, because you're certainly the master here and the wordsmith. What would be your reaction to throwing a comma after the word facilities in the first line?
I think that's fine. I think that the sort of meaning and integrity of the statement remains the same. I see what you're trying to accomplish. I would just want to run that by bond counsel. So Anne, I don't know if you have any thoughts on if that has legal consequence.
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I would agree with John.
Do we need the 2 there? In that case, does it?
Yeah, we
Agreed.
probably don't.
Well, then I would just think about this. If you have an extra word, I think I would maybe put a word, something like using the word especially between education and in, right about where your cursor is. High quality education, especially in nursing, healthcare, and sciences, if you have an extra word. And the reason I suggest that is because it doesn't allow anyone to pin us if we happen to do something to improve student access that isn't in nursing, health sciences, engineering, technology, and the trade.
Okay.
Because we just said especially in. So I would, if you get an extra word by losing two, put an especially in there. Or a word something like especially. You understand what I'm trying to do.
Yep. No, I hear the point. Yep. We'll work
I'll
on
let
that.
you think about that. Yeah.
Or
Okay.
a word particularly.
Or particularly is another good word that doesn't limit us to somebody coming back saying, hey, you offered English and math. That's not on the nursing, health science, engineering, technology, and skilled trades.
Sure. Yeah, and remember that ultimately the full project list is the controlling document, right? That's the language that spells out kind of the four corners on how you can spend bond dollars. This, 75 words, you can only say so much. So it has to be a reasonable summary, but can't possibly be comprehensive.
All right, well, think about particularly or something similar
Sure.
to that there. Seems you got an extra word.
Are we right at 75 with this language?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Okay.
language there is at 75.
Okay. Process-wise, are we having our final vote on the bond language on July 13th, or is that going to be the special meeting?
We'll need to call for a special meeting.
Yeah, the trustees who are about to be seated need to have this presentation done for them, have an opportunity to ask questions and contemplate the information. And then our goal is to have a special meeting, single agenda item meeting for sometime late July, early August. The wording is pretty tight. We have to file by August 12th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what is our goal for when we want to file that paperwork? Do we have a target date?
Well, I think we were talking about a special meeting potentially the first week in August, and I would recommend, within a day or two of the board adoption, that we go ahead and deliver that to the LA County Registrar of Voters. And it's rare, but in rare instances, they'll have them push back on a word count issue or something like that. Just
Yeah.
want to make sure we have time to resolve any of those issues before the 12th.
Okay, great. So we'll work with dates to get that set up.
And will the only item that we'll be formally voting on in the special meeting, will it be the ballot initiative language, or is there anything else we're going to vote on?
The resolution, I believe.
It's the full resolution that contains the 75 words, the tax rate statement, and the full project list.
Okay, well, we're going to approve the whole thing.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Anything else on items B1, bond initiative? We'll go on to proposed meeting schedule.
The next one is August 31st, and the reason is that that's when you all will review the final budget for which will be up for adoption the following week.
All right. Sounds all good with everyone? Seeing no opposition, are there any other future agenda items?
None here.
Tammy, did you get closure on yours?
Oh,
Or-
yes. On August 31st, I may not be able to dial in, but I will do my best.
Well, there's only 3 of us, and if you can't make it, Maybe
Well,
we
I
should
also-
look for a different date, you know? Is there a date before or after that?
Can I also point out that the new board will have its organizing meeting on.
Oh,
July
yeah, it may
13th,
not be
and
the
at
three
that
of us at
point,
all.
Yeah.
The question of who's on which committee will come up after that. So, we tentatively have it for August 31st, but
Yeah, well,
there
might as well
is a
keep it.
possibility that Tammy might not be on the budget committee. I don't know if that's the case, but we have to get to July 13th before
Yeah,
before
okay,
we should really schedule too far out with specific people's schedules in mind.
there we go.
But let's go ahead and keep it for the 31st.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
but we'll see what next week brings.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, did you have another topic that you would want on a future meeting, whether you're in it or not, Tammy?
Well,
Because you had your hand up.
I always have that programmatic breakdown, which I know.
But that is part of the final budget. You will get it.
Okay, and I need
Well-
to meet with Candace, and I forgot
Yes,
to make that
That's okay.
appointment. I'm gonna
yeah, you
email
will
myself.
get it. I promise.
All righty, I think
And
that
our-
brings us, I'm sorry, Jim.
Just a quick question. So our on the 13th, our Board of Trustees meeting is in person and it starts at 5 p.m., correct?
That is correct. It is in person and it starts at 5 p.m. with the oath of office and the organizing meeting. And I see Emmanuel has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not used to all these. Go ahead,
No problem.
Emmanuel.
Raised it. Thank you. I was just wondering if we could have a discussion on, I don't know if this would be the correct place to have it, but regarding advocacy for the bond and what we're restricted from doing and how we can participate.
Candace, you want to handle that?
Yeah, so Emmanuel, I'll reach out to you separately. We actually just recorded a do's and don'ts session for internal folks. And so I'll clue you into that. And then as the board makes the decision to call for the election, there are some differences and some things that we need to be mindful of as we go into the advocacy stage. But there's certainly a role that students need to play in that. And so we'll loop you in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there anyone else that wishes to make a comment before I adjourn the meeting? And now I'm looking over here on my chart to see if I'm missing any hands.
Can I just say thank you to everyone? This, this is a big undertaking. I've been through this in other districts, and so I know what it is we are facing. And I just want to say thank you because I think what we have heard tonight, as well as with other meetings, I think the district is in excellent hands, is being guided very well. And I am ready for that starter pistol to go off.
Okay. All right, so we will declare the meeting is now officially adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.